The story today, let me tell you in advance, if any viewers are afraid of the dark, this might be a nightmare for you, because it is an incident that happened in a village located deep in the forest and mountains, quite remote. At that time, Finn had the opportunity to go there for work, but when it was time for him to leave, the villagers approached him with strange words. Then he had an accident on his way back from the village and ended up being stuck alone in the dark forest at night. This story is called Evil in the Forest. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. The entire story took place over 10 years ago. One afternoon, Finn, who was a freelance electrician, received a call from an unknown number asking him to travel to a school located in the heart of the valley. The school's solar panel electrical system had been malfunctioning for several days, and they wanted to hire Finn to fix the problem. When Finn learned that the school was about 14 kilometers away from his location and that he would also have to drive up a mountain, he felt discouraged because he only had his trusty motorcycle for transportation. However, before he could refuse, the voice on the other end mentioned the amount of the payment for the job. This made Finn perk up, as the payment was equivalent to what he would normally earn in 6 months. Without a second thought, Finn quickly agreed. All he could think about was what he would do with that money once he got it. He discussed the job details and the route with the person on the phone. Once everything was settled, Finn gathered his tools and set off immediately, thinking that the 14-kilometer distance would take no more than 20 minutes, or 30 minutes at the most. He planned to finish the job quickly and return before sunset. He definitely didn't want to travel back after dark. Finn then set out for the school. The road leading up there was one the villagers had made themselves by laying crushed stones along the path. It was a road meant only for motorcycles because it was quite narrow. Each time he encountered another motorcycle, he had to find a spot to let the other pass before he could continue. However, this wasn't much of an issue, as encountering another motorcycle was a rare occurrence. At first, there were small rocks on the road, but they gradually became larger, making the journey quite challenging. The steepness of the road was a significant obstacle to maintaining speed, causing Finn to take much longer than anticipated. However, Finn eventually arrived at the school. There, he met the person who had hired him for the job, a middle-aged man who didn't seem to fit in with the locals. It later turned out that he was originally from this village but had spent a significant amount of time in the city, becoming more affluent. He had returned with the intention of developing his hometown. Just half an hour after he arrived, Finn's worst fear came true. The rain started pouring relentlessly, causing Finn's work to be delayed. However, after a short while, the electrical problem was fixed. The villagers and students gathered around Finn to express their gratitude. They seemed genuinely pleased. However, Finn's main concern at that moment was the rain, which showed no signs of stopping anytime soon. He knew if he waited for it to pass, he wouldn't be able to make it back home that day after receiving his payment. Finn thought it would be better to drive through the rain. He assumed there wouldn't be any issues and he would likely reach home before it got too dark. However, both the person who hired him and the villagers advised him to stay overnight and return in the morning since it was getting dark. They were worried about his safety during the journey. At that moment, Finn wanted to stay, but his discomfort with unfamiliar sleeping arrangements, especially in the middle of the forest, and the fact that he didn't know anyone made him hesitant. Despite feeling conflicted, he ultimately declined, albeit feeling slightly guilty. After that, Finn bid farewell and prepared to leave amidst the pouring rain. Before he could start his motorcycle, a man tapped Finn's shoulder and whispered to him, "If the sky starts to darken, find a place to hide and wait until morning. Good luck." Then, the man disappeared into the group of villagers waiting to see Finn off. The expression on the villagers' faces at that moment was one of genuine happiness, which made Finn feel relieved. However, upon closer observation of their smiles, they seemed oddly insincere. At that moment, Finn didn't think much about their smiles. He was more concerned about the man's words that left him feeling uneasy and puzzled. Finn wasn't sure what the man from the village meant, or if he was worried that Finn might get lost. It seemed unlikely, considering the narrow, single-track road he had taken, with no branching paths. And what did the man mean by advising him to find a hiding place when it gets dark? In the end, Finn couldn't shake off the man's words and kept thinking about them. He began driving out of the village, and by now the rain had started to let up slightly, which gave him some encouragement. The narrow and steep road didn't pose much of a problem for him since on the way up, he had to navigate the steep incline, but now he just had to control the descent of the motorcycle. Throughout the journey downhill, Finn couldn't take his hand off the brake. He gradually guided the motorcycle down. The raindrops that should have become smaller and stopped falling instead changed into larger ones, pouring down relentlessly, worsening the situation. However, Finn was determined not to stop and find shelter from the rain. At that moment, all he could see around him was forest and tall grass, and if he stopped to take shelter, he wouldn't make it home before dark for sure. He decided to continue driving and had to be more cautious. He persevered, and it seemed like the sky sympathized with him. The rain gradually subsided and stopped being stubborn. The previously overcast clouds disappeared, along with the fading sunlight. Finn continued driving on the small forest road. By then, he must have covered about half the distance. While he was focusing on the road, he heard a sound that surprised and frightened him greatly. A loud laughter coming from somewhere within the forest. He didn't know where the sound came from. It echoed throughout the forest. It was a laughter that seemed sinister and chilling at the same time. Then, the laughter gradually faded away. In that moment, Finn could only think about the words of the villager echoing in his mind. Or perhaps, in this wilderness, he wasn't alone after all. Finn glanced at the side mirror. The reflection of the mountain behind him was filled with trees and tall grass almost halfway up. Yet, there was nothing conspicuously out of place. As his gaze shifted from the road to the side mirror again, he suddenly noticed a large rock protruding in the middle of the road. In a split-second decision, he swerved to avoid it, knowing that a collision with the rock could mean a flat tire at best. Finn managed to swerve past the rock with precision, but before he could catch his breath, another obstacle presented itself. Ahead, there was a deep groove in the road, about an elbow's depth, carved out by the rain, rendering it impassable. Finn couldn't maneuver around it. The front wheel of his motorcycle fell into the groove just before he and the bike tumbled, rolling down the incline uncontrollably. Everything happened so fast. He felt a sharp impact on his left shin, but in the chaos, Finn didn't register the presence of his left leg. The event ended with him and the motorcycle still together, but in a rather dire state. His left leg pinned under his motorcycle in the position he was sitting, and the bike wedged against a large rock, preventing any movement. Whether it was luck or not, his left leg, now numb, didn't seem to feel anything despite being broken. He hurried to call back his senses, trying to figure out how to get out of there. He quickly searched for his mobile phone in his backpack, hoping it hadn't been soaked or damaged by the rain. Luckily, It hadn't, and Finn's hopes were met. With the remaining battery, he hastily dialed the number of the employer, the man who seemed most likely to provide assistance at that moment. After a brief moment, someone picked up the call. Finn quickly pleaded for help from the man, but his heart sank when the voice on the other end said, "It's getting dark now. No one here dares to go out after sunset, including myself. Find the safest hiding spot, stay quiet if possible. Keep calm and wait until morning. It'll be safer then." Before Finn could even ask what he needed to hide from, the man stubbornly cut him off. Finn wanted to call back to him for help, but it was too late. His phone battery died just then, and the sunlight had already faded away, leaving only darkness surrounding them in the middle of the woods. Finn struggled to pull himself out, but seemed to be exerting himself in vain. He tried for so long until he began to lose strength, and what he had forgotten earlier suddenly came back to remind him. The mysterious laughter echoed once more, quieter than before, but still disturbingly close. Finn looked around, surrounded only by darkness, and if that voice belonged to a real person, Finn knew he had to ask them for help. He shouted out desperately, "Help! My bike crashed. Is anyone there? Please help me." He shouted out, hoping that there would be someone around, but all he received in return was silence. It was eerily quiet. Then the words of the villager and the employer began to echo in his mind. Finn wasn't sure what he needed to hide from. As he pondered, the laughter echoed again, louder this time. He was more certain than ever that he didn't come up with it himself. The sound came from behind him, up the hill where Finn had tumbled down. But he couldn't tell who or what was making the sound because he couldn't see anything. All he could see was darkness. "Is anyone there? Help me. I'm trapped down here." Finn shouted for help once more, but there was no response, reinforcing his conviction that whoever might be out there wouldn't be of any help. It made him consider that the villagers' advice to hide must be because of bandits or, worst-case scenario, drug traffickers. If they found Finn in his current state, he would likely be killed or thrown off a cliff. With that realization, Finn knew he had to follow the villagers' advice. But finding a hiding place at that moment was likely impossible. All he could do was stay quiet as possible, and wait until morning. Hours passed, maybe 2 or 3, and Finn still heard the laughter in the distance. The echo of it seemed to be getting closer and closer. He probably couldn't escape or fight in this condition, but at least he had a small knife he had brought with him, which provided some comfort. As time passed, Finn couldn't tell how long it had been. There was no laughter anymore, but what he heard transformed into the sound of footsteps pacing around him. It circled around where he was, and he was sure it wasn't just 1 or 2 people, probably a dozen or so. However, judging by the pattern of the footsteps, they seemed to be approaching and then receding, repeating several times. Finn was more than a little unnerved by this, but soon, inexplicably, the sound disappeared without a trace. Not long after, Finn unintentionally drifted off to sleep due to exhaustion. However, he had to wake up because he felt pain in the area where his leg was broken. In the meantime, he heard something again, the sound of footsteps, but this time, it was just one person's footsteps, slowly approaching Finn, step by step. Finn felt the sound gradually getting closer, trying to remain as quiet as possible, hoping it would retreat as it had before. But it didn't happen as he expected. The footsteps continued to approach, sounding like they were breaking through the thick grass towards Finn. Even though Finn's eyes had adjusted to the darkness by then, he still couldn't see anyone clearly. With a knife clenched tightly in his hand, Finn braced himself for whatever was coming. However, the footsteps suddenly stopped, and silence enveloped the surroundings once more, leaving Finn's solitary tension hanging in the air. What was strange was that before, Finn wanted the sound to go away, but at that moment, he actually wished to hear it again, as at least he could pinpoint its location. He felt incredibly claustrophobic in this situation. Finn tried to strain his ears, but all he could hear was deafening silence. He attempted to look around until his eyes hurt, but he couldn't see anything. Then, suddenly, there was a whisper next to Finn's ear, a booming whisper similar to the laughter he heard before. The voice said, "Thank you." The stench of decay emanated from the breath of the voice, making Finn want to gag, but he tried to turn his face towards the source of the voice. However, he found nothing but darkness. He was confused about what was happening. At that moment, he realized that whatever was playing tricks on him might not be robbers or woodcutters, or even human at all. Deep down, he knew it from the start, but he had deceived himself to mask his fear. Soon after, Finn heard laughter again, but this time, it was multiple laughter, echoing throughout the forest. It was laughter filled with joy and chilling excitement at the same time. Some of the sounds seemed to come from deep within the forest, while others sounded like they were right beside his ear. These sounds confused and frightened Finn at the same time. He closed his eyes and took a hopeless breath, resigning himself to his fate. But as Finn reopened his eyes, there was a mysterious face staring at him, just a few inches away. The face was pale with hollow eye sockets. Its eyes were blood red and glowing, visible even in the dark. Its mouth was twisted into a sinister grin. But the most horrifying part was that what grew from its head was not hair, but small, tangled vines that twisted and coiled around each other. Then, Finn's consciousness faded away, and he knew nothing more. Finn woke up in what seemed to be a hospital recovery room. He felt a severe headache, as if his head was about to explode at that moment. While he was still confused about what had happened, after a while, the doctor and nurses entered, asking Finn about his condition and whether he was feeling any better. After conversing with the doctor, Finn learned that he had nearly lost one of his legs, but luckily, a border patrol soldier found him in the morning before it was too late. They rushed Finn to the hospital just in time. If they had arrived any later, the tissue in Finn's leg might have died due to lack of blood supply. His shin bone was broken, and Finn needed to recover here for some time. The story seemed to have come to an end, but in reality, it wasn't over yet. When Finn charged his phone, the first person he called wasn't a family member. He called the person who hired him to go up there, wanting to find out what exactly he encountered last night. But as soon as the employer picked up the call, Finn was left even more puzzled. The first sentence he heard from the other end was, "Did you sleep well last night? And why did you go out quietly without telling anyone?" Before Finn could inquire further, the employer continued, "It's unbelievable that you dared to walk back to the village alone in the middle of the night. I have to apologize. I had to ask you to stay in the village hall for the night." Finn was bewildered by what he heard. Before he could utter a word, he explained that he had an accident and broke his leg on the way down from the village. He was currently recovering in the hospital. This sparked a disagreement between Finn and the employer, as the employer claimed that he and some villagers actually saw Finn walking back to the village in the middle of the night, not speaking to anyone. They thought Finn must have been cold, so they quickly prepared a place for him to stay overnight in the village hall. Then, in the morning when they went to check on Finn, all they found on the prepared bed were scattered leaves. Furthermore, The employer also mentioned that the villagers in that village believed that midnight was the time for animals to hunt for food, including the mysterious beings they couldn't explain, as there were many living in this forest. Therefore, no one dared to venture out of the village in the middle of the night. In the end, no one could say for sure why Finn was told to find a hiding place. But the most surprising thing was that some villagers saw someone resembling Finn walking back to the village. Who that person was and why there were only scattered leaves left on the bed prepared for Finn in the morning remained a mystery.